I was sitting at the dinner table, smiling across at my husband, Elijah, as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small gift-wrapped box. It was our 7th wedding anniversary, and everything about the evening had been perfect. The candlelit dinner, the soft music playing in the background, the way he looked at me with pure adoration. Elijah, you didn't have to, I said, feigning surprise. I wanted to, he replied, grinning like a man who had just won the lottery. Open it. My hands trembled slightly as I unwrapped the gift, revealing a sleek black box. When I lifted the lid, my stomach dropped. Inside was a DNA testing kit. I thought it'd be fun, Elijah said, his voice brimming with excitement. You know, just to see our ancestry, our roots. And I got one for Olive, too, a father-daughter test. My breath caught in my throat. A wave of nausea rolled through me, but I forced a smile. I had spent years burying my secret deep inside me, convincing myself that the past would never catch up. But now it was clawing its way to the surface, threatening to destroy everything. I laughed nervously. You and these surprises? Elijah chuckled. Come on, Em, it's harmless, just a little curiosity. But I knew it wasn't harmless. I knew it was about to become the one thing that would rip my world apart. I barely slept that night. As Elijah and Olive swabbed their cheeks, sealing their samples into envelopes with playful excitement, I felt like I was watching my life collapse in slow motion. For years, I had convinced myself that Olive belonged to Elijah, not biologically, but in every way that mattered. He had been there since the beginning, the one who held her tiny hands when she took her first steps, the one who stayed up all night when she had a fever, the one who made her laugh until her little stomach hurt. And that's all that should have mattered, right? I turned over in bed that night, staring at the ceiling as Elijah slept soundly beside me, completely unaware that he had just set a ticking time bomb in motion. A week passed. I told myself the lab might make a mistake. Maybe the samples would get mixed up. Maybe something would go wrong. But when Elijah came home one evening, waving an envelope in his hand with an excited grin, I knew my time was up. They're here, he announced. I stood frozen in the kitchen, clutching the counter so tightly my knuckles turned white. Olive, our 6-year-old, looked up from her coloring book. What's here, Daddy? Our DNA results, sweetheart. We get to find out cool things about our family history. He tore open the envelope, his eyes scanning the paper with the eagerness of a child opening presents on Christmas morning. But the moment he reached the section about Olive, his entire expression changed. The excitement in his eyes dimmed. His brows knitted together. His lips parted slightly, as though he had forgotten how to breathe. Elijah? My voice was barely a whisper. He didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at the paper, as if the words on it didn't make sense. Then he looked at me, and in that moment, I knew. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. Emily, Olive isn't mine. The silence that followed was unbearable. The weight of his gaze crushed me, pinning me in place like a trapped animal. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How could they? How do you begin to explain something like this? Tell me this is a mistake, Elijah said, his voice barely controlled. Tell me the lab screwed up. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. My chest tightened. I wanted to run. I wanted to hide, but there was nowhere left to go. Elijah, my voice cracked. His hands trembled as he looked back at the paper. It says 0%. 0. He let out a hollow laugh, his eyes glistening. I have no biological relation to my daughter. His daughter. The word shattered me because he was right. He wasn't Olive's biological father, and he had never known until now. Elijah's eyes flicked back to me, and in that moment I saw the love he had for me turn into something else, something sharp, something unbearable. Who? His voice was almost a whisper. Who is he? I shook my head, tears pooling in my eyes. Elijah, please. Who is he, Emily? I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to will this moment away, trying to go back to before, to the life I had so carefully built on top of my biggest lie. But the truth was already out, and there was no taking it back. That's what it felt like standing in front of Elijah, my husband, as he held the DNA test results in his trembling hands. His breaths were ragged, uneven. His knuckles were white, gripping the paper as if letting go of it would make the truth disappear. "Who is he, Emily?" His voice was raw, thick with disbelief. I wanted to say something, anything, but my lips wouldn't move. My mind raced, searching for a way out, an excuse, a lie, one more lie to bury the others. But there was no running from this, not anymore. "Elijah, please," I whispered. Let's talk about this." His eyes burned into me, filled with something I had never seen before. Not anger, not yet. This was something worse. Betrayal. "You lied to me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. My chest tightened. "I never wanted to hurt you." His laughter was bitter. "You never wanted to hurt me?" He took a step back, shaking his head. "Emily, for 6 years I've been raising a child that isn't mine. Do you even understand what you've done?" I did, and yet I still couldn't find the words to make it right, because nothing could. Elijah's gaze was drilling into me, waiting, no, demanding an answer. So I told him. I told him about Oliver, a name that had been nothing more than a ghost in my mind, a past mistake buried so deep I thought it would never surface. I met Oliver before Elijah and I got married. We had been fighting, one of those meaningless arguments couples have that seem so big in the moment but are forgotten by morning. I was upset, hurt, and stupid. Oliver was a moment of weakness. It was one night, I admitted, my voice barely audible. A mistake. I regretted it the second it happened. Elijah flinched as if the words physically hit him. His jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists. And Olive, tears streamed down my face. "I didn't know, not at first. I convinced myself she was yours. She is yours, Elijah, in every way that matters. Except the one that does." His voice was sharp, cracking through the air like a whip. Olive's tiny footsteps suddenly echoed from the hallway. "Mommy?" Both our heads snapped toward her. She stood there in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed bunny, eyes wide with confusion. Elijah swallowed hard, quickly wiping his face before forcing a smile. A broken, trembling smile. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, his voice suddenly soft. "It's late. You should be in bed." She looked between us, sensing something was wrong. "Are you and Mommy fighting?" I felt my heart break all over again. "No, baby," I said quickly, rushing to her, pulling her into my arms. "Everything's fine." Elijah turned away, running a hand down his face. "Go to sleep, Olive," he murmured. "Daddy just needs some air." And then, without another word, he grabbed his car keys and walked out. The hours ticked by. I sat on the couch staring at the door, waiting, praying he would come back. When he finally did, the clock read 3:47 a.m. His tie was loose, his hair disheveled. He smelled like whiskey, though he wasn't the type to drink. His eyes were red, his face empty. "Where did you go?" I asked softly. He didn't answer, just dropped his keys on the counter and sat on the chair across from me, rubbing his temples. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, voice hollow. Neither did I. "Elijah," he held up a hand, stopping me. Don't." He exhaled shakily. "I need time, Emily. I need to think." A painful silence stretched between us. Then, finally, he looked at me. "You should have told me." I had nothing left to say, because he was right. That was the silence between Elijah and me. For days, he barely spoke. He went through the motions of our routine, waking up, getting dressed, going to work. But he was gone, a ghost in the house we built together. At night, he no longer held me. He barely looked at me. And when he did, it was with eyes that no longer saw me as his wife, but as a stranger, a liar. I wanted to believe there was something left to salvage, that maybe, just maybe, time could fix what I had broken. But deep down, I knew better. It happened on a Friday night. Elijah came home late. I was sitting at the dining table, waiting for him, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago. When he walked in, he looked exhausted. "Hey," I said softly. He didn't respond. He just loosened his tie, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and sank into the chair across from me. "I told myself I wouldn't ask," he muttered, staring at the amber liquid in his glass, but I can't stop thinking about it. I swallowed hard. Ask what? He looked up then, eyes burning with something between rage and devastation. Did you love him? I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Elijah, did you love him, Emily? His voice cracked. No, I whispered. It wasn't like that. He let out a bitter laugh. Then what was it like? I pressed my fingers to my temples, exhaling shakily. It was a mistake. I was angry, I was hurt, and I was stupid. It didn't mean anything. But it ruined everything. His voice was raw, filled with so much pain that I felt it wrap around my throat like a noose. He set his glass down with a sharp clink. I spent the last 7 years loving a daughter who isn't mine, he said, voice trembling. 7 years, Emily, and you let me. I didn't let you, I choked out. I wanted to tell you, I almost did so many times, but I was scared. Scared of what? His jaw clenched. That I'd leave? I flinched. Yes, he scoffed. And how exactly did keeping it a secret change that? I had no answer, because it hadn't. Elijah stood up suddenly, pacing the room, running a hand through his hair. Does Oliver know? The question sliced through me like a blade. No, I admitted. He let out a breath. So he has a daughter out there and has no idea? I nodded. I never told him. I never saw him again after that night. Elijah's laughter was bitter. Of course, that would have been too easy, right? He shook his head, eyes glistening. So what do I do now, Emily? Huh? Do I tell Olive the truth? Do I just walk away? Do I call this man and tell him he has a daughter? Tell me what the hell I'm supposed to do. Tears streamed down my face. I don't know. He slammed his fist against the wall. Damn it, Emily. I flinched, and then the worst thing happened. I watched as the anger drained from his face, replaced by something far worse. Resignation. He was giving up. I could see it. I don't know if I can forgive you for this, he whispered. My stomach dropped. Elijah, please. I love Olive. God, I love her more than anything. He exhaled sharply. But I don't know if I can look at you the same way ever again. A sob ripped through me. I never wanted to lose you. He shook his head, stepping back as if touching me would burn him. You already did. And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the wreckage of the life I had just lost. Elijah didn't leave that night, not physically. He slept in the guest room, the door locked between us. For days, we barely spoke. He would come home from work, avoid eye contact, sit with Olive like nothing was wrong, then disappear into that room. I wanted to tell myself it was temporary, that he just needed space. But deep down, I knew better. I had broken something that couldn't be fixed. One evening, as I was washing the dishes, I heard Elijah in the living room with Olive. Daddy, she asked, her little voice hesitant. Yeah, sweetheart. Why don't you sleep in Mommy's room anymore? The plate in my hand nearly slipped. Elijah was quiet for a long time. Then he sighed. Sometimes grown-ups have things they need to figure out, he said gently. But no matter what, you'll always be my little girl, okay? My chest tightened. She didn't understand the depth of what he was saying, but I did, because in that moment I knew, no matter what happened between Elijah and me, he wouldn't abandon Olive. She was his daughter, even if blood said otherwise, and for that, I loved him even more. A week later, Elijah finally spoke to me. Can we talk? He asked, standing in the doorway of the kitchen. I turned, bracing myself. Of course. He stepped inside, leaning against the counter, crossing his arms. He looked exhausted, like the weight of the world had been sitting on his shoulders for too long. I've been thinking about what to do, he started, about us. I swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the counter. And? He exhaled. I can't stay, Emily. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I don't hate you, he continued. I wish I did. It would be easier if I could. Tears blurred my vision. Then why? Because every time I look at you, I see the lie, he admitted, voice breaking, and I don't know how to love you past it. A sob escaped my lips. He ran a hand down his face, visibly struggling. I'm not leaving Olive. I could never. I'll be here for her, always. I nodded through the tears. I know. But you and me, his voice cracked. I can't do this anymore. I pressed a hand to my mouth, trying to hold in the sound of my heartbreak. I never wanted this, I whispered. His eyes softened for just a second. Neither did I. For a moment, I thought he might reach for me, might take it all back. But then he turned and walked away. Elijah moved out a month later. We told Olive it was just so she could have two homes instead of one, that nothing was changing with her and Daddy. She believed us, or maybe she just wanted to. I didn't tell Oliver. I didn't see the point. Elijah was her father in every way that mattered, and dragging up the past wouldn't fix anything. And me? I was left to pick up the pieces of the life I had shattered. Some mistakes you don't get to undo, some truths you don't come back from. This was mine,